Today we have a very special Manning report that we'd like to bring to you, and we're asking for your undivided attention at this time as we address the nation and we address the ancestors of those that came from the west coast of Africa starting 400 years ago and became slaves here in the New World and has helped to build America to the great superpower that she is right now. We don't know of any other nation that has had such free enterprise and labor sources as has had America, except perhaps her mother nation, England. But I'm here today to speak to you about reparations. That's right, you heard me say it, the word reparations, specifically reparations immediately for Harlem and for Fort Greene and to some degree Bed-Stuy. Now, you have heard a lot of talk in this recent presidential election from the Democrats and the liberals, people like Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker, all senators in the U.S. Senate and federal officers who have all testified before major audiences that reparations are in order. They've further gone and testified in their senatorial and federal careers that reparations would help to be able to bring a group of people who have been disenfranchised in many ways, enslaved for 400 years, or at least 300 years, and then the Jim Crow period that has exceeded that reparations would be the most appropriate, that all other passage of bills, even the great work of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was not sufficient to fill the gap. However, I do need to state that at this time, we want to focus primarily on reparations for the community of Harlem and for Fort Greene. For both of these communities have been economically raped. They have been culturally destroyed. A wrecking ball has been taken to the heritage of the men and women who have worked so hard for so many years to make this community the world's most famous, if you will, Black or African American. I prefer to call it Canaanite and Hamite community. But it has been raped, it has been stolen, it has been turned into a community that does not recognize its heritage or the ancestry of those that work so hard to make it what it is. And the process by which Harlem has been stolen, the same with Fort Greene, is horrendous. It's unconscionable what Japheth or white people have done to the suffering people here in Harlem. And so that God has changed the name to ATLAH. Let me quickly say that as well. But let me say also that reparations are in order, and we're going to approve within the federal court structure. We will take this matter, if need be, before the United Nations and declare that the government of New York City, the federal government working in hand with New York City, the banks and Wall Street and a large number of other people have violated the human rights, not the civil rights singularly, but have violated the human rights of those that have been known normally as the indigenous people of Harlem and Bed-Stuy and Fort Greene specifically. And by indigenous people, we're not just talking about Black or African American people, but we're talking about all peoples where whatever might have been their racial heritage, but we're a part of the indigenous lifestyle of Harlem that made it what it was in Fort Greene as it was as well, that those people have been robbed, they have been raped, they have been disenfranchised, they have been outbidded. The banks and the banksters have come with their large bankrolls, operating in cooperation with the city government through its tax structure and other government programs. And so I'm here today to call for reparations for the people that have been disenfranchised. I have been some degree hesitant about offering a number. My research on this matter is that I've not noticed anyone, even from Howard University or Kamala Harris or other who's a product of Howard University, as to whether or not a number of reparation payments should be given to everybody that's been dislocated, that has been raped, or that has been moved from their peaceful dwelling here in the community of Harlem and have gone into shelters or suffering or had to move back to the South or to other places where living was at least easier, if not cheaper. We want to make sure that every person that can trace its ancestry from the 1920s to the present have lived in Harlem, or your ancestry lived in Harlem, or you presently have lived in Harlem, or Fort Greene, or Bed-Stuy, that the New York City budget at present for the year of 2018 is $92.5 billion as best I can ascertain. Now, I suppose for the year 2019 would be similar, somewhere around $100 billion to run the city of New York. And so because over the past 20 years, New York City, its banks working in conjunction with Wall Street, have come up and bought up the properties, foreclosed on properties, taken properties for a song, and have now turned them into windfall profits of multi-million-dollar buildings, whereby some time ago it was owned by someone who was indigenous to the community, who perhaps failed in their ability to meet financial arrangements or credit worthiness because they do not have the long roots of financial backing that should have been given to them, or if reparations on a national scale have been made possible, that they would have the financial footing to stand, if you will, equal to every other banker or Wall Street person or young rich person or old money person that has come to this community and have purchased these multi-million-dollar beautiful properties and brownstones and businesses for a song, simply because the indigenous people did not have the financial strength, based on the fact that they've never had the financial leverage because reparations were never paid, and they were never paid for the work that they did in the building of America to participate in its wealth. And as America grew and became the wealthiest nation on planet Earth, its slaves were never recognized or never paid or aggrandized for the work that they had done, and were not allowed any profit sharing. And so the reparations globally, or nationally rather, as spoken of by Kamala Harris, or Cory Booker rather, and Elizabeth Warren, would have said that as America grew, that the reparations payment, as old money has been transferred from the daughters of the Revolution or to the sons of the Confederacy, or to many of the major trust corporations such as the Rockefellers, the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, where that money still continues to produce more money because of those long-term investments that the African slaves never had 1 cent or one opportunity to compete. So when the J-Fifth and others decided to take Harlem using their economic arms and their economic strength, it wasn't even a fight, because there was no money available to withstand, nor to meet the criteria that was required. And so many of these multi-million-dollar properties now were taken for less than $10,000 some time ago away from the indigenous people who had been given reparations back 100 years ago during the period of Abraham Lincoln, would have at least an equal footing to stand on old money 100 years old, and old investments that would be able to stave off any attack or financial takeover. There has been a vicious takeover of Fort Greene and of Harlem by those banksters and people without sentiments or sympathy or any kind of empathy towards the indigenous people. And we've got a larger segment of, if you will, homeless families now than we have ever had in the history of New York City. So going back to my numbers, I am now determining, and certainly after we have several meetings, we can determine whether this number should be upgraded. But for every person who's ever had any ancestry or had any address or ever lived in the Harlem or Bed-Stuy or Fort Greene, I should say specifically, and we want to include a corner of Bed-Stuy, that those persons in Harlem, not international reparations, and through the Harlem paradigm that we're going to show you how it's going to work in the federal courts and before the United Nations, then we can launch the national reparations program, and we will not allow anyone from the Democrat or Liberal Party to ascend to the office of presidency without making reparations their primary platform for full and complete equality in terms of the financial structure of the way this nation has been built over the years. And the crumbs that will be left after the present administration rips this nation apart financially. However, let me get to the numbers. The number should be anywhere or any person who can at any time either born, lived, ancestry, depending on the level at which their participation was in Harlem or in Fort Greene, should be anywhere from $100,000 individual payment to $1 million individual payment as reparations for the theft of Harlem, that this community has been stolen. That it should not have been called gentrification. It should have been appropriately referred to as the genocide of a people economically and financially and heritagely and according to their culture. Genocide, not gentrification. You need to understand that ripoff. And we also need to look historically at why and how this took place, where the people had elected officials such as Charles Rangel, David Dinkins, Basil Patterson, Percy Sutton, and others to oversee and to look out for their best interests, to legislate on their behalf so that they could not be steamrolled by the power of Wall Street, the bankers, the government, and legislature and laws that left them out and away from the table in the boardroom when such discussions were being made. But Charles Rangel and David Dinkins and Basil Patterson and Percy Sutton and a host of others sold out the indigenous people, lined their pockets with millions of dollars, and walked off, leaving Harlem homeless, broken, ravaged, destroyed, without any hope, until Almighty God has called me to this community to speak the truth. I need to remind you that there has been in the history of American blacks or African Americans of slaves this type of participation. Shortly after the end of the Civil War, while President Lincoln was yet alive, the 40 acres and a mule was the first sign of reparation. So when we go to court and before the United Nations, we're going to document that the federal government agreed that reparations were in order. And the first reparations were given as the 40 acres and a mule to be paid or given to each and every family, that they would have a land-based economic structure and the power with which to cultivate that land, that they might find themselves equal to others within the same region. That didn't work out. And by the time Andrew Johnson becomes president, that notion of the 40 acres and a mule gets quashed immediately, and it was suggested that the former slaves would form what was known as a bank that was called the Freedmen's Bank. Those that were freed, that they would have a banking system that was then backed up by the government, but it was really a bank that was supplied and stoked of its financial marketing by the then same persons that kept them in slavery for 350 years earlier. That bank later failed. And at the time, if my numbers are correct, they had encouraged all black people to have a banking system that would then make available to money so they could compete with other purchases of land, of property, or ideas, or manufacturing, or startup businesses, that bank would be there to help them. Simply all they needed to do was make all their financial deposits into that one bank. And so really all of the post-slavery blacks began to deposit their money into the Freedmen's Bank. Well, people like Charles Rangel, Basil Patterson, Percy Sutton, David Dinkins were the head of such Freedmen's Bank, looted it, it collapsed. They later brought in Booker T. Washington, who agreed to the idea, but also they brought in Frederick Douglass to try to save it, but the money was gone and the people were left bereft. And any real talk about reparations died like the cut flower. However, of late and in the most recent political ascent to the White House by Democrats, they've raised the issue of reparation on a national scale, and we'll get to that. But I want to point out that reparations should be paid to those who have suffered the genocide, those that have suffered from the banksters and the mobsters that have come and taken property and pushed people into homelessness and into despair and into drugs and into suicide because they have no economic base, nor strength, nor credit worthiness to be able to fight against the banksters, the Japheth, and those that have come and the crooked politicians, and that we are going to demand through federal statutes. Now, I have researched, and we have the ability to demonstrate in federal law, starting with the statements of Abraham Lincoln at the conclusion of the Civil War, that reparations is a federal law. I repeat, reparations is a federal law that is 150 years overdue, with interest, mind you. Now, I repeat, and we're going to demonstrate before the federal courts of this nation that reparation is a federal law spoken by Abraham Lincoln, and that 150 years, that law has not been organized or recognized or met by the American government. So it is in order that reparations come forward with interest. But we're going to start with the examples here in Harlem. And the reason why we're going to start here is because of the present condition of the Bethelite Community Church, of which I am the pastor. We'll come to that in the, if you will, heinous, unconscionable way in which the government has taken properties from literally countless thousands of men and women, homeowners and business owners and churches in Fort Greene, Bed-Stuy, and also in Harlem. But let me also state that our young people did a presentation for the New York City History Fair, to go on to the New York State and then to the National History Fair of Rosewood, Florida, a town that was primarily operated by blacks who were they were self-sufficient, they had own business owners, etc. But there's also Black Wall Street, which is what Harlem should be. There has been, in the destruction of Greenwood, Oklahoma, known affectionately as Black Wall Street, one of the more prosperous endeavors of the post-slavery blacks or African Americans or Canaanites, if you will, in the history of the world. It was a very prosperous town. And I have been preaching for years that a similar kind of Black Wall Street can be had in what was the indigenous people and the community known as Harlem, and God Almighty has changed the name of the community to ATLAH. Let me say, my Lord and Savior Jesus is with me on this. We're going to repeat and continue to repeat to every ear that will listen, that reparation is a federal law that's 150 years overdue. And the time now is payment in full. And we're starting here our example here in the community of Harlem. For many of you who are adverse to reparations for whatever reasons, maybe the sentiments of those whites that came into Black Wall Street in Greenwood, Oklahoma, or in Rosewood, Florida, and decimated the town because you saw the prosperous beings of those that had been former slaves and did not want to compete with them in the open market, so you destroyed their opportunity. Let me say a word to you. You would say, well, Pastor Manny, why are you for reparations? That is normally heard on the lips of liberal Democrats or liberal blacks. Well, let me tell you why. The reason why I say it is certainly not in conjunction with anything that they have said. If our lines happen to cross somewhere in the process, then so be it. But the reason why I say it is because I have not held back in saying that God Almighty, through the prophet Noah, ordered that the son of Ham, whose name was Canaan, would serve Shem and Japheth. The same way God said that the sons of Abraham would serve the sons of Ham for 400 years. They would be enslaved and they would be ill-treated in Egypt. I have said that the slavery that has been done was ordered by God. And that's where the Kamala Harris and if you will, the Jesse Jacksons and the NAACPs and others will not agree with me. But the Bible is clear that the slavery was ordered by Almighty God through his prophet Noah. Now, we'll say, well, what does that mean? But it also means that in corresponding to the ordering of the slavery of the Jews to Egypt, to my father Ham, that God spoke in Exodus chapter 11, verse 2. And when they were finally brought out and slavery had ended, now listen to this very carefully, when they were brought out of Egypt on that dreadful night and slavery had effectively ended, God ordered that every Jew should ask of every Egyptian handfuls, bucketfuls, sacksful of jewels and precious things as their reparation for their service there in Egypt those 400 years. My friend, this is biblical. This is of God. God, his name is Jesus, through the service, dedication, and commitment of Abraham Lincoln, ordered at the end of slavery. The same is Exodus chapter 11, verse 2, that every man would be given 40 acres and a mule, that he would be able to compete land-wise, enough space and acres to grow and to sell, and he was given a wherewithal to be able to produce. Abraham, God ordered that, but the Americans did not keep their end of the bargain. And so reparations is 150 years overdue. And so I'm now here. God has brought me here to Harlem to restructure and to rebuild and to build a righteous nation of people that will give glory unto God. Now, having said that, I simply wanted to address those of you who may be Japheth or Shemite who may question the integrity of what I'm saying. No, everything I'm saying about reparation is federally statute. It is a federal statute that reparations ordered by Abraham Lincoln be fulfilled. But it's also a biblical paradigm and correspondence in Exodus chapter 11, where God gave them jewels of all the Egyptians and then gave them a promised land. God gave to the Jews a promised land, or gave them 40 acres in the land called Canaan land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and gave them jewels as startup money to be able to produce and become a mighty nation, of which they are still celebrating the wealth that they took out of Egypt and the land, the 40 acres they were given when they landed in Canaan. It's biblical, my brother. It is biblical, my sister. It is biblical that God gave the Jews 40 acres and gave them startup money to be able to become the richest, wealthiest people on the planet that we know of through the biblical process. I'm just following the biblical paradigm. Now, so let's get clear about what we can be clear about. Reparations is a federal law that is 150 years overdue, and we're going to the federal courts to demand that reparations be paid with interest to those that can trace their ancestry back to the reparation days that Abraham Lincoln spoke of. That's to my Jewish and to my Japheth, to my white friends. I pray that you understand clearly and realize that justice needs to be done on this wise. Let me say a word to my Canaanite or Hamite or Negro or African American brothers who have opposed me all the days of my ministry and who have not helped me in any way, and now at this present state, hearing this ultimate truth, and now reparations has a bona fide leader, and we're starting here in the community of Harlem, and we'll talk about more about the inequities and the unequal application of taxation, interest rates for not-for-profits that the city, and I don't want to give away most of our legal arguments. And by the way, I will hear from, we will hold our meeting, we'll hold some first startup meetings, some plenary sessions to get started, and then we'll hold a mass meeting before we take our draft to the federal court. So the meeting place here will be at the ATLAH World Missionary Church as we go forward. Stay tuned to our broadcast and go to our website from time to time to get registered if you wish to be a part of this. And we're certainly welcoming lawyers and researchers and politicians and others to be a part of this process, as now reparations has a bona fide leader that will take it where it needs to go. Reparations is a federal statute. It is a federal law. It is constitutional, and it's 150 years overdue. We're starting in Harlem. And I'll talk to you more about the inequities and the way in which New York City treats its poor, and the reason why Harlem and Bed-Stuy and Fort Greene need to be first off the launch pad as a test case. But let me say this to you, to those African Americans and blacks who would find themselves in full agreement. They have never heard God speak so clearly that reparations is a federal law and a federal statute 150 years overdue. That gets the NAACP, Black Lives Matter, and all the black hustlers and politicians and Jesse Jackson and all the rest of them. That gets their juices going. It even makes Spike Lee do a dance and do the right thing. No, they've never heard it before, which then ought to signal to you that God has spoken it to me. That's why you never heard it. But you have traditionally, or I have traditionally rejected the African American cause, the civil rights cause. I have routinely rejected their ideas and ways in which they tried to bring about so-called a level playing field. I've rejected it. And I've consistently believed and waited to hear from my God, his name is Jesus, on how this should proceed. And the day and the hour and the word has come. But many of you will agree that this is glorious, Dr. Manning. We have a federal law that is 150 years overdue. Let's go to the federal courts and demand on a national scale that every person that can trace their ancestry back to slavery be paid reparations and interest. And we're ready to go. However, many of you will say, well, we're not going to join with Brother Manning because Brother Manning has spoken ill about our heritage. Brother Manning has spoken about our ineptitude. Brother Manning has spoken about our practices. Brother Manning has spoken about our own self-destructive modes of behavior. The good Dr. Manning has shined a light on us and told the truth. We all know it's the truth. But when Dr. Manning says it is painful and we perceive it as hate, let me pull your coat to something. I've never said anything about black baby making. I've never said anything about drugs and crimes and robbing. I've never said anything about black on black hate. I've never said anything that rappers have not said for the past 20 years and have become billionaires saying the same thing that you have chosen to make me a villain. You have made rappers billionaires saying the same thing, speaking the same truth about our community. So let's get straight and clear about what we can get clear about. I'm not saying anything that they don't say on a routinely basis, and they say it more viciously than I do. I say it out of love, as a sense of chastening and rebuking the son that is loved. God rebukes and chastens the sons that he loves. The rappers say it to make money, because whether they are willing to admit it or not, there's something deep inside the Japheth and the Jewish man that causes him to have orgasms when he hears another black man speak ill about a black man. And rappers are profound at speaking ill of their brothers, calling them the N-word and a whole lot more. And the Jewish and Japheth people throw billions of dollars in support of them just to hear them say what they say about their own brothers. But they say it to make money. I say it because it's true and because I love my brother. So you say, well, we don't know whether we're going to unite with me. It really doesn't matter. But can I share something with you? Because there's one other side of this, and then I'm going to be through with you on this whole matter of the launching of reparations against the genocidal takeover here in Harlem and in Fort Greene. And that is that there has arisen now by the works of Barack Hussein Obama, of which your greatest venom and hatred has been leveled against me because I did not support Barack Hussein Obama. But can I tell you this, and we'll ask the historians at Howard University to validate this, that if and when reparations become a fact, Barack Hussein Obama would not be able to get one dime from reparations. And the reason being is because you have to trace your ancestry to being black, to being a former slave or the ancestry of a slave. Obama's father was African, but he was Kenyan-born African. His mother was white, which means Obama, your so-called first black president, does not even qualify to get reparations, because he doesn't come from the same cloth that you come from. And I tried to tell you that. Obama does not qualify for reparations. But there's one other thing I'd like to say about Obama. You know, you are going to now look and say, well, Pastor Man, not only are you come down hard on the brothers in the hood and the slicksters and snake oil salesmen in politics that are black, but you've come out against the LGBTQ community in the most, if you will, in a very strong way. Well, let me say this to you. You know, Dr. King was killed there in April 1969, 68, there at a hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. You know the reason why Dr. King was in Memphis that night is that he had decided to go down to Memphis and march with the garbage workers there in Memphis. Many of his strategists had told him, King, don't go to Memphis, go back to Chicago. Don't go to Memphis. This is small potatoes. You can't really get any press out of this. The media is not going to pick up on it. The king, don't go down there and march in Memphis. Last time they marched, there was a riot. Many people were thrown in jail. And so, king, don't go to Memphis, they told him. But Dr. King said, I must go down to Memphis, like Jesus said, I must go through Samaria. And they marched in Memphis, the black men down there, simply asking for the opportunity to be a man, to stop being treated like boys, to stop being treated as second rate, to stop being treated as some sort of tree animal. I want to be a man, they said. The black men there in Memphis, Tennessee, and all over the South, and the up South as well. I want to be a man, is all they were asking for. And Dr. King marched with them. I am a man, is what they declared. But can I tell you, that's what Dr. King did. Can I tell you what Barack Hussein's most powerful piece of legislation and lasting legacy that he has left? His health care bill is in tatters, and I thank God for whatever portion of it that has helped you, and for pre-existing conditions and otherwise. I thank God for that. But we all know that that health care bill is in tatters, and it will not stand the test of time. Even Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and a bunch of others realize that something else has to replace it. But let me tell you what will be the lasting legacy of Barack Hussein Obama that I begged you not to vote for and not support. It will be the fact that he passed the Same-Sex Marriage Act through the Supreme Court, and now this debauchery is known and recognized legally in all 50 states. Now, King marched with men that wanted to be men, but Obama has marched with men who want to be queers. You see the difference? Look at that. Look at the difference between the men that march who carried a sign saying, I want to be a man. And that's the one that Dr. King marched with. But the one that Obama marched with says, I want to be a queer. I want to be a queer. I want to be a queer. Those are the ones. And that Obama marched with, you're going to have to make up your mind or get left in the dust or get run over by those of us who are going to march to the federal courts, because reparation is a federal statute. You're going to have to make up your mind across the length and breadth of the so-called Hamite and Canaanite people. Are you going to not support reparations to help the suffering and to relieve the years of pain and anguish of those that have died in squalor, worked their fingers to the bone to get nowhere in this white man's America? Are you going to not put your hand to the efforts that's now being led by the Honorable Dr. James David Manning, that reparations is a federal statute? Are you going to sit on your hands and forbear and not give your support or your voice because you don't want to offend those who say that they would want to be a queer rather than those who say they want to be a man? You're going to have to look long and hard at the fact you're going to abdicate helping Harlem, helping Fort Greene, helping across America, the south side of Chicago, south central Los Angeles. You're going to have to look hard and long at the fact that you're saying you're going to stand with the LGBT crowd and their rights and their laws, rather than come over and give your hand to the 400 years of relieving the 400 years of suffering, robbery, rape, castration, hangings, muggings, underemployed, bastardization. Are you going to tell the world that you're not going to come and help Dr. Manning? That's me. because you don't want to offend those who want the right to be queers or lesbians or gay or bisexual or transgender. You're going to stand with them rather than with Ida B. Wells, with Robert Abbott, with Samuel B. Fuller. Are you going to stand with them rather than the sufferers at Greenwood, at Rosewood, at Black Wall Street? Are you going to stand with the queers rather than the suffering? You're going to have to make that decision. And I'm not going to let you rest. We're going to flood the airways of those who've made the decision that they're not going to stand. And we're not going to let people talk about reparations, but at the same time, not stand with the one that God has chosen to lead this extraordinary march of perfecting this bill that is over 150 years past due. And for full disclosure, I need to say to you, that the ATLAH Church, which I am the leader of and have been so for 37 years, is now being attacked by the same group of banksters, unjust laws, crooks, and thieves that are attacking our organization. And God has let this matter come up that I might be able to see and that I might be able to stand and defend those. We're going to set aside a segment of this bill when we go to court as the Edward Earl Johnson, the Dr. Edward Earl Johnson, pastor, the late pastor of the Mount Moriah Baptist Church, 2050 Fifth Avenue. The church was foreclosed, smashed by the banks, and has now become a condo dwelling. Dr. Edward Earl Johnson, former president of the Baptist Ministers Conference of New York City and beyond, and also the moderator of the Greater New York Vicinity Association of Baptist Churches, who is deceased now. We're going to honor him when we go to court. That Dr. Edward Earl Johnson's name would be on this bill. We're going to honor people like Dr. John Paul Latson, the founder and builder of the Second Canaan Baptist Church that came out of the Canaan Baptist Church, where Wyatt Walker was the esteemed pastor who built that church with his very own hands, and the sons have sold it out. We're also going to honor people like Dr. J.R. Bryant, who was the pastor of the Legree Baptist Church. Likewise, this church has been sold by his sons, and the legacy and the work that he has done has all crumbled from the Legree Baptist Church there on 125th Street. So for full disclosure, you need to know that is what is going on and happening. Are you going to reject me because you're Japheth or you're Shemite? Then you'll have to reject what Moses told the Jews. Moses told the Jews that God was going to give them 40 acres in a land called Canaan, flowing with milk and honey. And not just that, but God extracted payments out of the hands of the Egyptians. And every man was given pockets and bags full of gold and jewel that was ordered by God. That was the first reparations of 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Now, we've had 400 years of slavery here in America, and it has come to an end. And the Lord has brought me here to make such statements. I want to let you know that there are people that are suffering. There are people that are afraid, and that they have no one to represent them. But I will stand as God has called me and prepared me for just such an hour as we now exist in. Reparations is a legal statute ordered by the 16th president of the United States of America, and it's 150 years overdue with interest. Reparations, 40 acres and a mule. It's a federal statute. We're going to court, and we're going to the United Nations that we might be able to receive. Some of you, I am presently publishing a book called I Am Who I Am. Oh, it's going to be a great read when you read it. But it's called I Am Who I Am. And I want you to understand I am who I am because of my God that I serve and because of the people, the Canaanites and Hamites, that I love so deeply and so dearly. I loved them. I do. I love all of God's people. But I love those that are now due payment for their service to this nation. And I have to tell you, I love my ancestors. Because the LGBTQ crowd is a very powerful crowd. They may not let this message run on Facebook. We may have to put it on the drums on 125th Street because they may not let it run on Facebook because the truth is so compelling and powerful. But I want you to understand something before I take my leave here today. I want you to understand that I will not abdicate the values of my and your grandfather and your grandmother who would not acknowledge this same-sex marriage. Your grandmama, your grandfather, and their mothers and their fathers, their grandmothers and their grandfathers, and right on back, all the way back up into the Garden of Eden would never accept this. We'll make a brief stop in Sodom and Gomorrah where God demonstrates that he doesn't accept it either. Because I feel that this is going to be one of the greatest enemies to people making a decision to come and sit at the ATLAH Church as these meetings proceed. That the LGBT, that they're going to make and take their sides with the LGBTQ, but your grandmama and your grandfather. These who want to march as queers, opposed to those who want to march as men. You see the difference? Obama is for those who want to march as queers, but Dr. Manning and Dr. King is wholeheartedly for those who want to march as men. In the mid to late 50s, Dr. King made a statement in Ebony magazine when Mr. Johnson was just publishing that magazine and was just getting lifted up, and they asked Dr. King for an interview. And they asked him about homosexuality at that time. And Dr. King said in that interview with Johnson at Ebony magazine that homosexuality was a psychological disorder and it needed to be condemned to the medical specialists to be able to cure people of such disorder. These are the words of Dr. King. Now, the words of Barack Hussein Obama are different. But I will not, under any circumstance, I will never abdicate my ancestors. I would never abdicate the strength of their religious beliefs. I refuse to take part in such a debauchery as we now find ourselves. I thank you for your time. I thank you for allowing me to point out the sellout of black politicians. Someone posted up on a video I put up on Facebook some time ago that the Japheth people, the banksters, the crooks, the politicians, and the lying politicians have bought out Harlem. And my respondent said, no, they didn't buy it out. The people sold it out. Their leaders sold it out, and they're so absolutely so correct. I thank you for this time. We're going to announce the date of the meetings. We are putting together several caucuses of meetings. Our headquarters is here in Harlem on Lenox Avenue and 123rd Street. It's where our headquarters is. We'll continue to preach the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, teaching people the ways of blessings, the key to the power of blessing. I might add that this statement that is now coming forward is a release of using the key of government, using the key of the Trinity that we spoke about this past Sabbath, that has now brought about this message about reparations. The people of Harlem who have suffered, been displaced, disenfranchised, need to be paid. and each individual not less than $100,000 depending on their standing, and as much as $1 million depending on the gravity of their loss. This bill that was passed by Abraham Lincoln is long, much, much too long overdue. There has not been, even with W.E.B. Du Bois, and as much as I honor Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey and others, one yet by God led with the strength to make sure that we will not talk about reparations as a future event, but we'll talk about reparations as a present event. And we're starting here in the capital of the black community. We're starting in the capital of the African American. Of course, I prefer to call them Hamites and Canaanites. We're starting here in Harlem. Look for dates of our meetings. You can go to our website and register. We'd like to know more about you and how you can participate. And this is not just a black thing. It's an all peoples thing. We welcome the help of Shem, which is the Jewish son. We welcome the help of Japheth, which is the white man. We welcome the help of Ham and Canaan. We welcome the help of all. We welcome the help of Muslims. We welcome the help of those who have the wherewithal to finance this mighty movement of establishing not the Freedmen's Bank, which was a sellout proposal. No, we welcome those that will help us establish finally ATLAH. That's what God said. ATLAH, that's what God said. Thank you so very much, everybody, for your time. I am James David Manning. I am the Lord's servant. You will hear more about reparations, or the launching of reparations for Harlem, for Fort Greene, and for America.